World Service. We're a weekly program. Our job is to add in-depth analysis to one question from the news. We hope you like it.
BBC World Service, this is Helena Merriman with The Inquiry. This week, with growing warnings about the existential threat posed by super-intelligent machines, we ask, should we fear artificial intelligence? On Monday, dozens of investors, scientists and entrepreneurs came together in an unprecedented move, writing an open letter in which they called for computer programmers to not only focus on making machines more clever, but to make sure that those machines don't do more harm than good. One of the signatories was the leading physicist Stephen Hawking, who said this in a recent BBC interview.
I think the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race.
By full artificial intelligence, Professor Hawking is referring to the scenario where computers become as intelligent as us.
Once humans develop artificial intelligence, it would take off on its own and redesign itself at an ever-increasing rate. Humans, who are limited by slow biological evolution, couldn't compete and would be superseded.
Elon Musk, the technology entrepreneur, described artificial intelligence as humanity's greatest threat, more dangerous than nuclear weapons. These warnings made headlines around the world, but there's more to it than this. Over the last 3 years, investors have poured billions of dollars into artificial intelligence startups. In the near future, there are fears about how AI could affect jobs, weapons and financial systems. But this programme is not about those more immediate threats. In this inquiry, we want to know whether the risks described by Stephen Hawking and others are real. If machines surpass human intelligence, could that threaten our very existence?
Part 1 of Paperclips and People.
Of course, fears about artificial intelligence aren't new.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
In 1968, Stanley Kubrick's film, 2001, A Space Odyssey, brought those fears to life.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me. And I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
So how realistic is this dystopian vision of machine intelligence? To answer that, we need to start this inquiry by finding out exactly what could go wrong if machines become as clever as us.
It's too long been the domain of myths and entertainment and science fiction and kind of idle speculation. But it looks like some powerful technologies could pose significant existential risks, and we need to take those seriously.
This is Swedish philosopher Nick Bostrom, a philosopher with an unusual background. He studied physics, computational neuroscience and mathematical logic, founding the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford University. Professor Bostrom says there's one moment, above all, that we need to get right. And that's the very first time we invent a machine that has human intelligence.
AI is not just a tool, it's not just one more clever little invention or a cool new gadget. It's the last invention that humans will ever need to make, inasmuch as the superintelligence would then be better at inventing than we would. So it would be critical to get it right on the first try.
And if we don't get it right?
The bulk of the risk is not in machines being evil or hating humans or feeling resentful because we have enslaved them or anything like that, but rather that they are indifferent to humans and that in pursuit of their own goals, we humans would suffer as a side effect.
Here's an example.
Suppose you had an AI, a super intelligent AI, whose only goal was to make as many paperclips as possible. Or maybe you've built this to run your paperclip factory. Now imagine that you were this AI and you're trying to select every action to maximize the number of paperclips that will exist in the future. You also can reflect that human bodies consist of atoms, and those atoms could be used to make a lot of really nice paperclips. It's not that you hate humans or feel resentful, it's just you want paperclips. It turns out that in the pursuit of this, you would have instrumental reasons to do things that would be harmful to humanity. The same holds for almost any other goal you might plug in, instead of paperclips.
But isn't all of this based on one very big assumption? That machines will reach the stage where they not only match human intelligence, but then surpass it. Is that really possible?
There have been various points in the past where people have said, well, machines might be able to do this, that, and the other, but they certainly can't do X. Chess is maybe the best example, where it used to be regarded as sort of the task that really required high level of human intelligence and strategizing and logical thinking, something far beyond computers. But once computers actually beat us in chess, then we thought, well, chess playing, it's not such a big deal. And we've moved the goalpost a little bit.
But some people would say, look, we haven't understood the brain yet, so how can we know whether we can design a machine that could replicate the brain?
One way that we could eventually replicate that in machines would be just to reverse engineer the human brain. Like figure out exactly how it is that the human brain goes about doing this. It might be that we will reach that level of capability through some other path first, but in principle, you could just study the human brain and figure out how it does it.
And it's this point that's at the very heart of the debate around artificial intelligence. Before we ask whether we should fear artificial intelligence, we need to know whether it's even possible for machines to share the same kind of intelligence as humans. Is Nick Bostrom right when he says the brain can be reverse engineered and then replicated in a machine? Time to meet someone who has dedicated her career to understanding the brain.
Part 2. Science fiction?
My prime interest has always been how it's possible for the mind to exist and how it works.
This is Margaret Bowden. She's a professor of cognitive science and has spent the last 50 years using computational models to study the brain. She even has a robot named after her.
Yes, there's a robot. Yes, it's called Maggie. It's a sort of little round thing which chunders about on the floor, but it does some rather interesting things.
Maggie, the human, is sceptical about little round things like Robot Maggie ever catching up to its namesake.
I wouldn't be at all surprised if there will never be a human-level intelligence in AI.
Here's a story she tells to explain why. It might not immediately seem relevant, but stick with it.
Well, there's this fairy story of the fisherman who goes out fishing and he catches this huge fish, more beautiful and more large than he's ever seen before. And as it takes it out of the water, it actually starts talking. And it says to him, "Oh, please, please, I don't want to die. Throw me back in the water. If you throw me back in the water, I will give you 3 wishes, anything you like."
He doesn't go for the obvious option, to wish for more wishes. They never seem to do that in fairy stories. Instead,
he says, well, my first wish is, because my son is a soldier out fighting in the war, and we haven't seen him for several years, so my first wish is that my son would come home. And my second wish is, well, my wife and I, we don't have very much money, so it would be lovely to have £30,000. That would make a huge, huge difference to our life. And he says that the third wish, well, I'm not quite sure. That's not so easy. Can I come back tomorrow?
The fish agrees, and he throws it back in the water. The fisherman goes home. Moments later,
there's a knock at the door, and they bring his son back into the house in a coffin. And 10 minutes after that, there's another knock at the door. It's the postman. The postman gives him a letter, which he opens, and there's a cheque for £30,000 in it from the life insurance company.
Substitute the fish for a machine, and you understand the point she's making. It's a limited, literal form of intelligence. Was there a third wish?
Oh, sorry, yes, the third wish, he goes back and says, please can you undo my first 2 wishes?
It's always the get-out clause in those kinds of stories.
Yes.
So Professor Bowden admits that machines are better than us at some narrow tasks, such as searching through masses of data in an instant. But she says it's unlikely they'll ever develop a more human, general intelligence.
The time and effort and money that would be needed to really try to match human intelligence at a general level, I don't think will be put into it, because if you want a human intelligence, there's a very easy way of getting it, namely, get more human beings.
More money, time and effort is being put into AI. But she says there's a more fundamental reason why computers won't outsmart us.
The brain doesn't work by magic, and the brain is, in some sense, underneath all of our psychological capacities. So I'm not saying it's in principle impossible, but the human mind is hugely complex, and we'd need to understand it very, very well at a theoretical level in order to have an AI that matched it. And we're nowhere near that yet, and I wouldn't be surprised if we never get there.
But the complexity of the task hasn't stopped people from trying. The EU is funding an ambitious project to map the human brain. AI researchers say that through non-invasive scanning techniques, it's now possible to see connections between neurons forming and firing in real time. They argue that the analysis of these functions can then guide the development of intelligent systems. But Professor Bowden says this isn't enough.
Psychological things, mental things, have to be understood at the psychological level as well as at the neural level.
So how would you describe what you think are the greatest challenges for machines achieving human intelligence? What are those areas where you think they just won't be able to match it?
Well, understanding of language is the obvious first one. I mean, that is hugely difficult, hugely rich, hugely subtle. And we don't know how language works in the human level. I mean, we don't know, but we certainly do know that it involves understanding of things at a very basic semantic level, which AI, as yet, hasn't reached.
But our next expert witness says that computers will match human intelligence, and he says the future could be rather scary if they don't. His first piece of evidence is from a groundbreaking broadcast of a game show 4 years ago.
Part 3. You have upgrades.
This is Jeopardy! The IBM Challenge. Here are today's contestants. From Los Angeles, California, Brad Rudder. An IBM computer system able to rapidly understand and analyze natural language, Watson. And from Seattle...
The long-running game show in America, Jeopardy, pitted two former winners against an IBM computer called Watson. It was, perhaps, an unfair match. Watson, with its 2,880 core processors in 90 servers, 16 terabytes of data, and 80 teraflops. That's 80 trillion logical operations per second. But it was, after all, just a computer.
Tickets aren't needed for this event, a black hole's boundary from which matter cannot escape. Watson.
What is Event Horizon?
Yes.
Watson answered question after question correctly, beating the two human contestants by some margin. It was the most successful public display of the ability of computers to process natural language.
We've already seen examples of Watson being able to deal with double entendre and be able to deal with puns and get the right answer, make the right inferences.
This is Neil Jacobstein. He's co-chair of Artificial Intelligence and Robotics at Singularity University in California. Students go there to explore ways of using technology to solve some of the world's greatest problems. He sees what happened on this game show as an important marker in the future of AI. He says that the moment at which machines develop intelligence similar to ours is fast approaching.
The way to think about that is probabilistically. So you could say that a artificial intelligence that has something like human capabilities might have a greater than 50% chance of arriving by 2030, thereabouts, and a higher likelihood by 2040 and an even higher likelihood after that.
We spoke to Professor Margaret Bowden earlier today, who you may know of. She says, although she doesn't say it's impossible in principle to ever replicate the brain, she thinks it's very unlikely that machines will ever be able to match human intelligence in a generalised way, with all its sort of subtleties of language and understanding humour and interpretation.
Well, I know Margaret and I like her, I respect her, but I think that we will, in fact, be able to emulate most aspects of the brain, if not all. And I think we can build mechanisms that use similar principles, but we don't have to completely mimic the way the brain does its processing. And I think we'll come to understand the brain over time in a way that is systematic.
So we have a stark difference of opinion between our second and third expert witnesses here. Professor Margaret Boden says it's highly unlikely machines will ever become as smart as us in our general intelligence. Neil Jacobstein says they will. Since Professor Boden says you can't rule out the possibility of it happening, then we'll continue this inquiry on the understanding that it is at least possible that machines will become as intelligent as us.
That could be a very good thing, because our brains haven't had a major upgrade for over 50,000 years, and they evolved under very different selection pressures than the ones that we see today. We now have torrents of information coming at us, terabits of information. We have major challenges ahead, and I think that we would benefit greatly from having our brains be augmented by artificial intelligence in a variety of ways.
So in answer to our original question, Neil Jacobstein says we shouldn't fear AI. Rather, we need smarter machines for our own benefit. But what about the problems outlined by our first expert witness? That example of the diligent robot replacing the human race with paperclips, turning the world into a giant stationery cupboard.
We owe it to ourselves to build systems that don't have the characteristic that they can just go off half-cocked like that. I think that we need to build systems that have external monitoring so that we're using AI to monitor AIs.
Using AI to monitor AI? That might not satisfy everyone. Who monitors the AI that's monitoring the AI? Let's pause for a moment. We've been told about some of the dangers that super-intelligent machines pose. And although it's debatable that computers will ever outsmart us, all our expert witnesses agree that it's not impossible. We've also been told that AI could help us solve some of humanity's greatest problems. In that case, what should we be doing now to make sure that we get the AI that helps us, not the AI that harms us?
Part 4. Robocrat.
The idea that, this is just a coding issue and technology can deal with it on its own, that strikes me as implausible.
This is Ryan Calo. He's a law professor at the University of Washington in Seattle. Someone who got interested in robots as a young boy and carried on talking about robots, sometimes to his detriment.
People really did laugh at me a little. I mean, that is to say, I would talk about what I did and people would say, who's going to play you in the movie and so forth.
You could say he's a man whose time has come. He now co-chairs the American Bar Association's Robotics and Artificial Intelligence Committee. And he's given evidence on AI to the US Senate's Judiciary Committee. So does he think we should fear artificial intelligence?
I think we should. I don't think we should fear it in the same way as we might fear a monster, in the sense of being out to get us. Rather, as we begin to commit more and more to artificial intelligence, and as it gets more unpredictable, then we should be concerned. It's reasonable to fear all the way up to the idea of fearing for humanity itself.
Professor Calo is one of those leading the call for a federal robotics commission in the US to start looking at some of the legal issues around AI. He says mistakes are already being made.
So Nevada a few years ago passed a law explaining how driverless cars would go in the state of Nevada. And as far as I know, it's the first state law to define in a statute the term artificial intelligence. So they define artificial intelligence as any time that the computer substitutes for what the driver would do.
Professor Calo and his colleagues spotted a problem with that definition of AI.
A bunch of us looked at it and observed, well, that's not a good definition of artificial intelligence in the driving context, because cars are constantly doing things that the driver used to do, right? I mean, even anti-lock brakes, when you hit the brakes, you are basically suggesting to the vehicle that it slow down, and it thinks about it, okay, yeah, I guess I can.
So legislators in Nevada had to do what no legislators like having to do.
Nevada had to repeal the definition of artificial intelligence and write a new one. And so just to dramatize this for you, that means that the first time that a state body, legislative body, defined artificial intelligence was also the first time it made a mistake in defining artificial intelligence.
This is not a good position to be in. The law playing catch-up to AI developers who are racing ahead. It's clear that most of us are only just beginning to learn about what the risks are, and, at a certain point, we won't be able to do what the fisherman in the story did and undo what we've wished for.
I do think that we are committing a tremendous amount of our lives to machines and to algorithms. And I do think that, these changes are happening fast. And so I do believe that the time is right now to be thinking through the legal and policy aspects of this technology. And that if we don't, we're going to face some problems.
For Nick Bostrom, it's all about numbers. These numbers.
There are a lot of people who are trying to figure out how to make machines more intelligent. Tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people around the world are working, contributing in different ways to this. But that might only be like half a dozen or a dozen people at the moment who are actually working on the control problem. That's not in proportion with how important the problem actually is. So sometimes we humans don't allocate effort and attention in proportion to how important the problem is.
But if we do allocate enough resources to the control problem, Neil Jacobstein says that AI won't supersede humans, but will act as our clever companions, bringing us all to new levels of intelligence.
Although the dialogue is often framed around AI replacing humans, the most powerful chess players are actually a combination of AIs and humans. And we're going to find that combination is incredibly powerful and is likely to lead to fantastic advances in solving our grand challenge problems in energy and poverty, environment, ocean health, global security.
So, should we fear artificial intelligence? Well, perhaps the answer depends on what we do with that fear. If it results in us rejecting AI, possibly not. That could mean that we fail to benefit from what could be one of the most transformative tools in our evolution. But if it's a productive fear that leads to more research on safety issues, then that fear might be a good thing. So perhaps it means being a little less human about it and approaching AI as a machine might. Instead of asking whether we should fear it, asking, very rationally, how do we get what we want from it?
The Inquiry is produced in London by Simon Mabin and Neil Russell. We want to know what you want to know. Demand an inquiry. Get in touch on the BBC World Service Facebook page or on Twitter at BBC The Inquiry.